Today's daf is daf Mem Aleph. And let's just go back for a minute to the Mishnah, which is on daf Mem Amid Beis. And the Mishnah tells us about the Kriyas HaTorah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim, when he went into the Azorah after the Sorah Mishtaleach. And the Mishnah says that the Kohen Gadol would read from three different parshios. He read from Achremos and from Ach Be'asar, and these are both pretty relatively close to each other in Vayikra. Achremos, of course, is Vayikra Tezayin. Ach Be'asar is Vayikra Chav Gimel. So there was no need for Galila, and he read both from one Sefer Torah. And then he was Golel. Now he's ready for the third Kriya, which is from Parshas Pinchas, and that he reads Baal Peh. That's called Ubesor L'Chodesh Hashvi. So the Gemara says the following. We learned in the Mishnah of Korei Achremos, Ach Biasar. So he would skip over from Parshas Achremos to Parshas Emor, Ach Be'asar. And the Gemara asks for a mini. We have a Mishnah in Masechet Megillah at the end of the Masechet on Chavdal in Medalgin ben Novi ve'ein Medalgin b'Torah. Okay, fine. You didn't have to do a Galila, so there's no issue of Kavod Tzibur. But we have another issue about Dilug. And we never skip from one parsha to the other, omitting certain psukim. And we'll try and understand why that's so. Omar Abai Lo Kasha, Kan B'chtei Yifsok HaTurgamon, Kan B'chtei Shlo Yifsok HaTurgamon. Meaning that Abai initially, we'll see how he changes his mind later, understood that the Isur Dilug formulated in the Mishnah Megillah is based on the fact that there's going to be a problem of Kavod Tzibur, which in our case, in the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur, there's no problem of Kavod Tzibur. Now, what's the problem of Kavod Tzibur? How long will it take to be Golel in a case of a Dilug? There's, let's say, a short Dilug and a longer Dilug. And in the case of a longer Dilug, which means that there's a distance between one parsha and the other, quite a significant distance, which is Kadeshi Yifsok HaTurgamon, which means that the Turgamon will be able to finish his job as a Matargim even before they get to the second parsha. So that after the Turgamon finishes, the people are sitting and waiting, they're in Hikon, until they finally are complete with the Galila, and they get to be gold to the second parsha. That's the problem of Kavod Tzibur, because the Tzibur is going to be in a waiting position. But that has no relevance to the Dilug from Achremos to Emor, which is such a short Dilug, that it's Kadesh Lo Yifsok HaTurgamon. By the time the Turgamon finishes interpreting the previous parsha, the first parsha, which in this case is Achremos, the Avodas Yom Kippurim, by that time, they're already up to Parshas Emor, meaning they've completed the Glila. And therefore, there's no need for the people to be delayed. So the Gemara immediately objects. It says, V'ha'alok Tani, with regard to the Mishnah in the Masechet, at the end of Masechet Megillah, it says, Medalgim b'Navi ve'ein medalgim b'Torah. That in Navi, we're allowed to jump from one parsha to another, but not in the Torah. V'adkama b'Daglin. And even in the case of Navi, where they were matir dilug, how much of a dilug would they allow? Ad Kadesh Lo Yifsok HaTurgamon. In other words, that they'll be able to achieve the Gilgul before the Meturgama finishes up, so the people are not waiting. They're listening to the Meturgam. And that's the only case that we were matir in Navi. Bichlal de B'Torah, klalu klal lo. That with regard to the Torah, we don't allow for any dilug whatsoever, even if there's no issue of kavod hatzibur. And it's interesting because, again, Abaye is going to, based on this kasha, he's going to have to rescind his original interpretation. And the Turiyeva wants to give an explanation for what Abaye's logic was. He thought that when the Mishnah says, Ad kama midalgin, it's not to interpret the heter of dilgin navi that's mentioned in the Reisha, but to interpret the Sefer that it's also to be medalg b'Torah. In other words, the Ad kama here in the Mishnah, if we interpret it on the Sefer, is coming to limit the Isur Dilug in Torah, and to say that there are situations which allow and permit Dilug even in Torah, as long as it's Kadesh Lo Yifsok HaTurgamon. But nevertheless, Abai now offers another reconciliation to justify our mission of Kohen Gadol when he is medalig from Achrimos to Emor, as opposed to the Mishnah Megillah, which in a flat, absolute sense, with regard to Torah, establishes that we don't allow for Dilug. So Dilug is no longer an issue, again, with regard to Torah, of Kavod HaTzibur, but it's a separate Isur Dilug. And that means that we maintain the continuity of the Torah, the integrity of the continuity of the Torah, by not skipping anything. So how could the Kohen Gadol skip? Elomar Abai lo kasha. Now Abai reformulates his justification, reconciliation, by saying kan binyan echad, kan b'shnei inyanim. What is the problem of diluk? And here Abai is machadish a chiddush. The issue is that when a person pays attention and he's focused on one subject, then it's not very simple for him to snap his fingers and zbang, as the Israelis say, and all of a sudden focus on a different topic. And with regard to Torah, this becomes a serious problem. And that's why we're going to prohibit dilug as long as it's shnei inyanim, because for the mind to go from one inyan to the other, that could create a takola. What's the takola? The takola here might be that the Torah itself gives us the mitzvos. And when we listen to the Torah, we're really listening to the mitzvos. And that's a public reading of the Torah. And we have to be concerned about the possibility that people won't be able to understand because you jump from one parsha to the other, from one inyan to the other, one theme and one subject to another. And, they're going to be so confused that they might come to a takola. They might come to what's the word I'm looking for? To pervert the meaning of the Torah. In Nevi'im, where there are no mitzvahs, there's no chashash. But now we go back to Yom Kippur, and that's called Inyan Echad. It says, Abai, there we have no chashash that a person can focus on one Inyan and then jump immediately to another Inyan. He'll get all confused, because here we're talking about Inyan Echad. Whether we're reading from Achremos or from Emor, we're always being osek in the parshios of Yom Kippur. And you don't have to reshift your focus. Now, Rabbi Rhodes, I want to point out here that I'm wondering about the following question. It would seem that these halachas that we're learning now go back to the time of Moshe Rabbeinu in the Mishkan. Right? There was Yom Kippur in the Mishkan. There was Avodas Aaron HaKohen and Ubanav in Mishkan. And they read the Sefer Torah in the Mishkan. Now, again, I'm not sure if there was a Sefer Torah at that point. It could be that the Sefer Torah was written Megillos, that's a sugya in Gittin Daf Samach. But I would certainly believe that there was a Kriyas HaTorah in the Mishkan on the part of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. And why do I point this out? Because the Gemara, I believe it's in Bava Kama, establishes that at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, they only read 3 psukim. There was one Koreh, they didn't call up more than one. Later on, Ezra established 3 Kruim and 10 psukim, but at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, it was only 3 psukim for one person. So this whole subject of Dilug is very odd. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine Dilug within 3 psukim. I don't know. And I'll tell you why this bothers me. Because if Moshe Rabbeinu knew and instituted this Isur Dilug, in other words, if it was active at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, and now the Gemara is saying that Dilug is a problem because you might make mistakes in understanding if you go mi-inyan li-inyan. So that means that Kriyas HaTorah involves a certain havana, a certain understanding of the Torah. And at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, the mitzvah of Kriyas HaTorah was not a mitzvah of understanding the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu had no matar, he didn't institute the matar game. So if we fast forward to Ezra, where Ezra institutes a matar game, so now Kriyas HaTorah takes on a new dimension, and it's a kiyum of understanding the Torah. Now I understand that dilug is a problem because you might distort the meaning of the Torah, because you don't have a chance to make that shift from one inyan to the other. And the reason I mention this is because it seems in the commentary that I have here, and he quotes the Darkei David, he seems to assume that this is going on during the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. He says that the Chazal and the Medrash tell us about Hafsakas bein Parshiyas Shabbatorah, Laseis Revach LeMoshe Lisbonen bein Parsha LeParsha. I don't know, I'm not sure. Anyway, Vatanya, the Gemara asks the following kasha: what are we going to do with the following brisa? Medalgim b'Torah b'inyan echad u'b'navi b'shnei inyanim v'kan kidei shelo yifsok haturgama. So it means that the brisa is applying both reasonings for the Isur Dilug, and therefore you've got a problem with regard to Torah, because as we said before, the problem of Dilug is that he won't concentrate, he might misunderstand the Torah. And he's got an additional problem of kavod tzibur. So you have to always add the condition of Kidei Shelo Yifsok HaTurgman, that he'll be able to be golel the Sefer Torah before the Metargim finishes his job on the previous parsha. But then the Brisa says, Ein medalgin min navi lenavi. So you can't, for example, read Yirmiyah Navi and then skip over to Yeshaya Navi, or the other way around. Anyway, so the din is that in Kriyas HaMaftir, Kriyas HaTorah, you've got to read from one sefer. So you see that even with regard to Navi, we have this concept of what we spoke about before, Tiruf Adas, because you're jumping from one Navi to the other. However, the exception to that rule is B'Navi Shel Shnei Masar and Treyasar Medalgin, because Treyasar is considered as one long book of Navi. Ubelvad shelo yidalig misofa sefer l'tchilaso. In other words, you have to be medalig in the forward position, moving forward in Treyasar, but not moving backwards. So this brisa, it's the section that we just read starts with the word ve'hatanya, and the word v'hatanya could mean two things. It could mean I'll bring you a proof from a brisa, or vatanya means I'm going to ask you a stira from the brisa. Here it means I want to bring you a proof from the brisa, because the brisa indicates that there is a heter dilug in the Torah, as long as A, it's mi'inyan echad, and B, it's kadesh lo yifsal ka b'turgum. Now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Golel es haTorah menicha b'cheiko, and then the Kohen Gadol declares to the audience, Yoser mimasha karasi lufnechem kosuv kan. The kolkach lama. Why does he have to make this announcement? What's the goal? What's the agenda? Shlo lahotzi laz al sefer Torah. What's going to happen now? He is now, the Kohen Gadol, going to read from Parshas Basar, which is in Pinchas, and the Karbonos Musaf of Yom Kippurim, and that he's going to read Baal Peh. Now, the other Parshios that came before, Achrimos and Emor, there he read Mitoch HaSefer. So the ongoer is the spectator is wondering, why is he now reading Baal Peh? And perhaps it means he found a pagam, a fault, and a mistake in the first Sefer Torah. Otherwise, he would have continued in that Sefer Torah. And therefore, the Kohen Gadol would make an announcement that there's a lot more in this Sefer Torah than what I read to you. And the Rashash explains what that means. Yoser mimasha karasi lifnechem kosuv kan. Ein kavanos alomer shekosuv kan yoser me'ashir shekarasi lifnechem. Ella mi'inyan zeh shekarasi ad achshav. Dainu mi'inyan avodas Yom Kippurim. With regard to Yom Kippurim and its avodah, there's a lot more in the Sefer than what I read to you. And it's as if he's saying that Mimasha Karasi Lifnechem Kosuv Kan Yosef, from that which I read to you, meaning the inyan of avodas Yom Kippurim, there's a lot more here. So therefore, says the Rashash, Kavanoso ala kriyashu osid likros balpeh. He's now telling the people about that kriya that he's about to embark upon in the future, meaning in the next minute, which he's going to read Baal Peh, that this too is mi'inyan Yom Kippurim. And this is also written in the Sefer. So that's what he's telling me. He's telling the people that what he's reading Baal Peh is in the Sefer. So they should know that the Sefer is not pogum. And that's called in the Gemara's language, Kadesh lo yilhotzi laz al Sefer Torah. The Mishnah establishes that Basar b'chumash hapekudim kore Baal Peh. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean kore Baal Peh? The likrechei la sefer. Why doesn't he do galila? The likre, and then he could read from that same sefer. Omer Rav Huna Rav Yehuda Omer Rav Shei. Slufi shein golin sefer the tzibur. We're worried about kavod tzibur, that the tzibur doesn't have to sit there silently, anticipating the end of the galila until they get to the next parsha. So, in fact, the Gemara lay say Sefer Torah Achrina v'likri. Why don't they prepare a second Sefer Torah from the get-go? And therefore, there's no need for Galila. This way, the Kohen Gadol could read from the Sefer Torah without causing any delay and undermining Kavod HaTzibur. And you see how the Gemara is working overtime to avoid the ultimate situation that the Kohen Gadol has to read Baal Peh, because Dvarim Sheviksav, Iyata Rashai Lomer Baal Peh. There's a special leniency of allowing for the Kriyas HaTorah Baal Peh. But if we can avoid it, let's avoid it. So if Huna Bar Yehuda Amar Mishum Pgago Shel Rishon, again, the issue of Lahotzi Laz, that people think, why are you bringing out another Sefer? Apparently you found a Pagam in the first Sefer. So preparing a second Sefer to avoid the necessity for Galil is not going to solve your problem of Hotzos Laz. However, Reish Lakish has a different explanation as to why they couldn't prepare a second Sefer, and they had to read and the Kohen Gadol had to read Baal Peh. According to Reish Lakish, the bracha on Kriyas HaTorah is chal on the Sefer. You know, it's not just on the Maisa Kriya, but it's a bracha on Kriya mitoch HaSefer. And what's going to happen now is that if you bring out a second Sefer, Reish Lakish holds, you're going to have to make another bracha. And that's called a bracha she'eina tzricha. Therefore, it's better in all possible alternatives that we read Baal Peh. And if we read Baal Peh, then we don't have a new Kriya Mitoch HaSefer that's going to be Mechayev Birchas HaTorah. And therefore, you could be Yotze, the Kriya Baal Peh, with the original bracha that he's Mevarech on the Sefer. And we're going to carry over that bracha and bridge from the Kriya Mitoch HaSefer to the Kriya Baal Peh. So the Gemara asks, are we really afraid that the Roim, the spectators, who see that they brought a second Sefer, would come to the conclusion that there was a pagam in the first Sefer? How can you say such a thing? On Rosh Chodesh Teves Shechalios b'Shabbos, we're going to bring out 3 svarim. For Amar Rabbi Yitzchok Nafka Rosh Chodesh Teves, which is during Chanukah, Shechalios b'Shabbos, if it overlaps with Shabbos, so now you have 3 kriyos. You have the kriya of Chanukah, which is from Parshas Noso. You have the kriya of Rosh Chodesh and the kriya of Shabbos. And we're going to read all these on Shabbos. So we bring out 3 svarim. I mean, there's a whole issue about the Seder, whether Rosh Chodesh comes before Chanukah or after Chanukah. But in any event, Korei Achas Minyono Shel Yom. So he's going to read from the first Sefer Torah, the Parsha, whatever Parsha it is. It's usually around Miketz. The Achas Shel Rosh Chodesh. Now he reads from a second Sefer Torah, the Parsha of Rosh Chodesh. And this has to do with the principle of Todim, Shena Todim, Todim Kodem. And the Achas B'Shel Chanukah. Now he has the third Sefer Torah for Chanukah. So why aren't the people going to say, hey, wait a minute, why did they take out another Sefer? Maybe there's a pagam in the first Sefer. So Gemara says, Tlasa Gavri B'Tlasa Sifri Leka Pagam. We're not worried about the Roim and a pagam L'Otzos Laz in the case where they read 3 different people in 3 different Sifrei Torah. They see that each one wanted to read whatever he wanted to read from his Sefer, and the Sefer is Chaviv Lo Yoser, and now the second guy came up and he read from his favorite Sefer. Everyone had their own favorite Sefer. Apparently, by the way, we're going to see this a little later on, that in those days, they read from the private Sefer Torah that was owned by an individual. It's like every Ola would bring his own Sefer Torah because Zek Helevi Aveyu would be a Hidur mitzvah for him to have the Tzibur be Yotzei Kriyas Torah from his personal private Sefer Torah. But Chad Gavra Mitrei Sifri, when the Kohen Gadol is the one person, and he's going to be reading from 2 different Sfarim, Ika Pagama, then the Rome are going to say, hey, why did this Kohen Gadol bring out a second Sefer? Apparently there's a Pagam in the first Sefer. The Mishnah says, brachos. So again, let's go back for a moment to the Mishnah. On Daf Mem Amud Beis. And the Mishnah says that Mevarech Aleha, after he completes the Kriya, he recites Shmona Brachos. One is Ala Torah. Okay, every time we read the Sefer Torah and we complete the Kriya, we have a bracha of Asher Nosan Lanu Torah Seves. The Ala Avoda, he says a bracha of Ritzei B'Amcha Yisrael, V'tirtza Avoda B'Dvir Beisecha, and he completes it with B'Yira Nava. Oschol Levadcha B'Yira Nava. Then he has Al Odoya, which is Birchas Modem Anachloch, Ala Tov, etc. Tov Lecha, Lahodis Lecha, and now he's completed the Avoda, and there's no Avoda without Hodah. That's a Gemara Megillah Daf Yud Ches. So Ve'ach Todi Chabdedoni, and then he makes a bracha Mechilas Avon, etc., 8 brachas until it says Vashar Tefillah, which we'll try to analyze what Vashar Tefillah means. Rabbanon. Mevarchim ala Torah, kiderch mevarchim beis hakneses. We have a bracha lachrea, as we said before, Asher Nosan Lanu Torah Seves, which we recite after the kriya of every kriya, and that's what we're going to do with regard to the Kohen Gadol's kriya on Yom Kippurim. V'al avoda, that's bracha v'ritzei. V'al haudah, that's modim. V'al mechilas oven melech soleach mochel v'soleach. Hitikuna. All this is a repetition of the nusach of the tefillah. But then we have separate new brachos, which is ala migdash b'fnei atzmo. So he makes a bracha around about the migdash, and the bracha ends with Baruch Asher Bachar B'Migdash, and then V'al Yisrael, and the bracha V'al Yisrael finishes with Baruch HaBocher B'Yam Yisrael, V'al HaKohanim, and he ends that bracha with Baruch Shebachar B'Zaro Shel Aaron, and then Al Yerushalayim. So Yerushalayim is now the 8th bracha. And all this is called, in the language of our Brisa, Bifnei Atzma. Bifnei Atzma meaning it's a new nusach. It's not the old Kittikonam, which means the old nusach HaTfilah. Vashar Tfilah, what does that mean? Tan Rabbanon, Hashar Tfilah, what does that mean? The Kohen Gadol now gives a tefillah, a brach of tefillah, which is sort of like a general brach. Tchina rino bakasha, sha'amcha Yisrael trichim livashea, and this is a combination of bakasha and rina, and the bakasha is very obvious. Amcha Yisrael trichim livashea. However, we add the words rina as well, the word rina as well, because we're going to thank Hashem. The Chosem B'Shomei Tefillah, we say, God, we extol you and praise you because you hearken to our prayers. Now the Brisa adds, Mikan v'elech, after the Kohen Gadol finishes the brachas, Kol echad v'echad, maybe Sefer Torah mitol Pesach. This is what I mentioned earlier, that apparently it was very common in those days that each one would bring his own personal Sefer Torah for the Kriyas HaTorah, so he could read from the Sefer. And that's a kiyum of Zeh Kelim Aveu, the Korebo, and he would read the Parsha of the Yom. The Cholkach Lama, why would they go back home to bring the Sefer Torah to the Azorah? Kedei laharos chazuso l'Rabbin. They would show off, so to speak, not in a negative sense, the Noi and the Yofi of the Sefer Torah publicly. And that's a kiyum of Hisna Lefanav b'mitzvos b'Sefer Torah Na. This reminds me, by sheer association, of the Gemara, I think it's in Chagiga, about Lechem Aponim, that when the Ole Regel came, they used to show the Lechem Aponim that was fresh at the end of the week to the Ole Regel. That's also Hisna Lefanav b'mitzvos. When you have a beautiful chefetz of the mitzvah, you want to present it to others. I still remember Sam Schneider, if he was alive today, he'd be 150. He used to buy a beautiful esrig, and when we made the hakafas, he used to share the esrog with everyone. Everyone got a chance to take his esrog and make a hakafa. Zeh Kelim Aveu was no lefanav b'mitzvos. Okay. He writes here in the note, to make a public display of the beauty of each person's Torah scroll, and also the glory of the owner of the Sefer Torah, went to the trouble, to the expense of writing a beautiful Sefer Torah. And this reflects the principle of Zeh Kelim Aveu, beautify oneself before the Almighty by making beautiful the objects of his mitzvahs. For example, by writing a beautiful Sefer Torah on fine parchment using fine ink. So he says that after the Kohen Gadol concluded the reading of the Torah and the blessings, each person present at the reading would go ahead, bring his own Sefer Torah from his house into the Azorah. Although it is forbidden to carry through a public domain, the Brisa maintains that the biblical prohibition of Hotzah, Mirshus Ushus, does not apply in Yom Tov. And that's a sugya in Masechet Yoma on Daf Samach Vav. Alternatively, Yerushalayim was a walled city whose gates were closed at night, and therefore biblically it's considered a Reshus HaYachid in which carrying is permitted. And we mention this because in the next Mishnah, with regard to the bama of the bima, I should say, the bima of the hakel, there was a whole issue about carrying it. So if an Erev Chatzeris was made for the city's inhabitants, everyone was permitted to carry. So since on a Doraisa level, it's a Reshus HaYachid because it's mukaf imechitzos. Nevertheless, the Rabbanon prohibited it, but the Rabbanon allowed for an Erev Chatzeris. Okay, now we get to the Mishnah of Hakel. The Melech was called upon to read the Parsha of Hakel publicly, the Lashon HaKodesh, and he would read from Mishnah Torah, B'yoznei kolam b'chag ha'sukkah shel motzei shnas hashmita. So we're in the 8th year of the cycle on Sukkot. We'll see exactly what day on Sukkot. And after the 7-year cycle passed, on the 8th year, there was a mitzvah of Hakel. And that's in Parshas Vayelech, Dvarim Lamed Aleph, Vayitzav Moshe Sam Limam Miketz Sheva Shonim B'Moed Shnas HaShmita B'Chag HaSukkos, etc., etc. The Torah doesn't say explicitly who reads the Torah from Mishnah Torah, but the Chachamim darshan that it's the Melech who is in charge of reading the Sefer from the Sefer Torah and Hakel. Okay, now the Mishnah says the following: Parshas HaMelech, that which has to be read by the king B'Lashon HaKodesh, Ketzad, B'Motzei Yontif HaRishon Shel Chag. So notice that we're on the first day of Sukkot, but not on that day, but Motzei, meaning on the day after Yontif Shlosim, Bashmini. Now the word Bashmini doesn't mean on the 8th day, because we're talking on the 2nd day of Sukkot, but rather it means the 8th year in the Shemitah cycle. But Motzoi HaShvius, after we end the Shemitah cycle, and then we're going into the 8th year. Now the Mishnah describes how they set up the Hakel. Osim lo bima shel eitz ba'azara. Out of a wooden construction, they made a platform in the Azara, v'hu yoshev aleha, and the Melech would sit on the platform. Shenemar miketz sheva shonim b'moed. Now this is interesting. What does the Mishnah gain by quoting this pasuk? So you have to say that the word shenemar here goes back to the beginning of the Mishnah, after the word Ketzad, Motzi Yontif Arishon Shel Chag. It's not referring to the fact that the Melech is sitting on this platform, on this bima. So the Mishnah is citing this verse to substantiate the time of the mitzvah. The pasuk says, "Vayitzav Moshe Sam Leimar Miketz Sheva Shonim B'Moed Shnas HaShmita B'Chag HaSukkos," and then it says, "B'Bo Kol Yisrael Liros Es Pnei Hashem Elokecha." B'makom asher yivchar tikras haTorah zos neged kol Yisrael b'ozneim. Nazan hakneses notel sefer Torah v'nosel Rosh hakneses nosel skan nosel Kohen Gadol nosel Melech omed umekabel v'kore v'yosher. So this entire passing of the Sefer Torah from the lower to the other is something that we saw similar to the passing of the Sefer Torah, the Kohen Gadol, and we go up the hierarchy until finally the Kohen Gadol is going to receive the Sefer Torah and transfer it over to the Kohen, to the Melech. The Melech receives the Sefer Torah, but he reads while he's sitting down. And this is going to be a problem because usually we don't allow sitting in the Azorah. And not only that, but the reading of the Sefer Torah publicly in Kriyas HaTorah B'Tzibur, it was always done by Amida. But however, there's a separate license for the king to sit while reading Hakel. And the Gemara is going to derive this from Psukim. However, the Melech could be mochel on his kavod, and he could stand. And that's what we're going to see here in the next part of the Mishnah. Agrippas HaMelech, he was the king of the Jews. He descended from Herod. And he was a king during which his reign, the temple, was destroyed. Now, there are two Herodian kings with the same name, Agrippas. There's Agrippas number one, or the first. He's the son of Herod. He actually died 25 years before the destruction of the Mikdash. And his son, Agrippas II, died many years after the destruction of the Mikdash. And Rashi assumes that the reference here to Agrippas is the second Agrippas, the son of the first Agrippas, who was alive at the time of the destruction and died many years later. Agrippas HaMelech Omad v'Kibel v'Kara Omed. He read the Sefer Torah in a standing position. And this is based on the principle of Melech Shemochal Kvodo Mochel. But in fact, ain't Kvodo Mochel. So the question is going to be how he could do this. But v'Shibchu Chachamim, the Chacham said that this was a great pious act on his part by relinquishing his royal honor to give honor to the Torah. And the Gemara is going to go through this. So now we get to the pasuk in Dvarim Perek Yud Zayin, which he's going to read, and it says, you may not place over you as your king a foreigner who is not your brother. Zolgu ein of Dmos. He started crying. Why? Because he was disqualified as a king. He was a descendant of Herod. Herod was an Eved Knani who usurped the throne of the Chashmonaim. However, the people tried to calm him down, and Amrulo, they told about Tisyari Agrippas, Achinu Atah, Achinu Atah. His mother was Jewish. Now, this is based on Rashi here on Daf Mem Aleph, but it seems that Rashi understood that Agrippas' mother, this Agrippas II, was a bona fide Jewess. No, she was born Jewish. And that's why this Agrippas could be a melech. But that only makes sense according to Rashi, because Rashi understood that we're talking about the second Agrippas. Because the first Agrippas was the daughter of a Shivcha. How do we know this? The father of the first Agrippas was married to Berenice, the daughter of Herod's sister, who possessed the same status as a Shivcha, as a slave, as her brother Herod, and thus passed it along to her daughter Berenice. So Berenice had the same status as a slave because she was the brother of Herod, who was a slave. Then the first Agrippas, who is the son of Bernice, was really not kosher to be a melech. But Rashi holds that we're talking about Agrippas II, whose mother was a full-fledged Jewess. Which parts of the Torah does the melech have to read? From the beginning of Chumash Devarim until Parsha Shema, which is in Devarim Perek Vav in Parshas Vaschanan. And in addition, he reads the Shema, which is Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shamayim. And then he fast forwards from the 6th chapter of Dvarim to the 11th chapter of Dvarim, and he reads the Parsha of Vayim Shema, which is Kabbalah's old mitzvahs. Okay, now he skips over to the 14th chapter of Dvarim, which is Aser Ti Aser, because Chag HaSukkos is the time of the Osif, the time of Matnas Aniyim, of Trumas and Maisris, and that's the Parsha of Aser Ti Aser. Now again he skips, again this is all the Melech, and he reads from Parshas Kisava, Kisechala Li Aser. That's in the 26th chapter of Dvarim. And that's the Parsha of Bir Maisris. Then he goes back to Parsha Shoftim, rewinding to Perek Yud Zayin, and he reads the Parshas HaMelech. And there's a whole Parsha about the Melech in Shoftim, Perek Yud Zayin of Sefer Dvarim. Now, even though this Parsha is earlier in the Torah than Kisechala Li Aser, why change the order and the sequence of the Psukim? Afal Pisha Parsha Zui Lifnei Parshas Kisechala Li Aser, which is towards the end of Sefer Dvarim in Kitavo. Nevertheless, first he'll do a dilug. Why? Because he started the Inyan of Masris in the reading of Aser Tiaser. So he wants to stick to the same Inyan, like we discussed earlier. And therefore, he'll now be Messiah the Parsha of Masros, which concludes in Perek Chavav in Kisavo, and then he goes back to read Parshas HaMelech in Shoftim. And then he reads V'korei Brachos Uklolos. That's also in Kisavo. So he's already holding in Kisavo. Now he's going to read the Brachos and Klos of Kisavo. Achid Gomer Kol HaParsha till he completes Parshas Kisavo. Now, after Kriyas HaTorah, the bracha, the Melech will recite 8 brachas, as we saw before. And the Mishnah clarifies that brachos shakoin gadol mevarach osan b'yom kippur, Melech mevarach osan b'maimon hakel. So the same identical eight brachos that are recited by the Kohen Gadol when he finishes the Kriya on Yom Kippurim are recited by the Melech after he completes his Kriya of Hakel. Ella shenosein shel regolim tachas mechilas amon. Instead of that bracha about mechilas amon, which we said is appropriate for the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim, which is the day of Kapar Mechila, he will take that bracha out, omit that bracha, and substitute Asher Bachartanu, that you have chosen us, Ata V'chartanu Mikol Aman, until he concludes in the Kaddish Yisrael Vazman. And now we get to the Gemara. We learned in the Mishnah that Kriyas Parshas HaMelech was on Motzei Yontif Rishon Shel Chag on the 8th year. The Gemara thinks that the word 8 now refers to Shmini Atzeres. Vashmini Sal Kedaitach? Could it be that the Mishnah is telling us that we finished Chag HaSukkos and we're going to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Hakel on the 8th day, which is Shmini Atzeres? That can't be. Ema Bashminis, but rather we read it as Lashon Nekeva, not Shmini, but Shminis. And Shminis means the Shana Shminis, and it's the year after the Shemitah. Now the pasuk says, "Mikate Sheva Shonim b'Moed Shnas HaShemitah b'Chag HaSukkos b'Vo Kol Yisrael Leiros." There are 4 simanim here on the Zman of this mitzvah of Hakel, and the Gemara is going to go through all 4 to explain them. Kol Hani Lomali Tzrichi Dikas Rachmana Mikates. If it only said Mikates Sheva Shonim, and the Torah would mention that it's Shnas HaShemitah B'Mina Nimnu Mehashta. Let's start counting from today. From the moment that Moshe Rabbeinu received this command of Hakel, we start counting 7 years. Afagav Lo Misrami B'Shmita has nothing to do with Shmita. It's therefore Kosev Rachmana, the Torah had to spell out Shnas HaShemitah, that we start counting the 7 going into 8th year from the Shemitah cycle. Because Rachmana B'Shmita Avamina B'Sof HaShemitah. Why does the Torah have to add b'moed? We might have thought it's the end of Shemitah. That means before Rosh Hashanah of the 8th year. And that's called Mikate Sheva Shonim, at the end of 7 years. To tell you that the Zman is in the Chag. And in this context, Rosh Hashanah is not called a Chag, it's not called a Moed. So therefore, we must be going into the 8th year, at the end of the Shemitah, and we're fast forwarding to the Moed, to the Chag. Ikos of the Moed. If it wouldn't have said specifically Chag HaSukkos, Havamina Merei Shaita, that Rosh Hashanah is also called a Moed, because in Parshas Emor, where it says V'ela Moadei Hashem, Rosh Hashanah is on the list. It's Kos Rachmana b'Chag HaSukkos. Now, Ikos Rachmana Chag HaSukkos Havamina, Afilu b'Yontif HaAchron. We could fast forward to the end of Chag HaSukkos, and that's where we will become the mitzvah of Hakel. That would mean on Shmini Atzeres, which is the last day of the Chag, because Shmini Atzeres is also part of Sukkos. And the Taz in Orach Chaim Siman Tov Reish Samaches proves from this Gemara that Shmini Atzeres is called a Chag. Is Kosa Rachmana Bebo Kol Yisrael. What does Bebo Kol Yisrael tell us? Me'aschalta de Moed, from the beginning of the regel. So it's not the end of the regel, but the beginning of the regel. And that's when all of Klal Yisrael comes, Liros is Pnei Hashem on Aliyah regel. So now we should come to the conclusion that the right time to read the Sefer Torah would be on the first day of Yom Tov. Me'aschalta de Moed. And now we're going to explain why it can't be on the first day of Yom Tov. The time that all Israel comes to appear at the Mikdash is the first day of Yom Tov, and accordingly, the time for Hakel should be on the first day of Sukkot. But this is not possible, however. The first day of Yom Tov, we are forbidden to construct a platform, the bima from which the king would read the Sefer Torah on Yom Tov. No, so why don't we erect a platform on Erev Yom Tov? The answer is we're in the Azorah, and that would crowd up the Azorah on that day that myriads of Jews visit the Azorah. Therefore, in order to set up this bima, it's apparently so critical, and we'd have to construct it in the Azorah, but not on the first day of Yom Tov, but rather we could postpone the Kriya of Hakel until the first day of Chol HaMoed. And on this, you'll see Tosas Dibra Maskil Kosav Rachmana on Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph.